Let's dive right into this explainer. We're going on a pretty wild ride today, zooming all the way from the macro systems of your body, like those vast electrical highways making up your nervous system, straight down to the microscopic cellular gateways that actually decide how medications work. Seriously, if you've ever wondered how a tiny pill somehow knows exactly where to go and what to do once you swallow it, well, you're in exactly the right place. To keep us on track, here's our roadmap. We're going to hit 1. The drug-body connection, 2. The autonomic nervous system, 3. Fight, flight, or rest, 4. The language of cells, 5. Receptors and G proteins, and 6. The adrenergic targets. Section 1. The drug-body connection, setting the rules. So here's a fundamental rule of pharmacology we have to establish right off the bat. A drug circulating in your bloodstream, it's basically blind. It cannot just magically invent new biological pathways out of thin air. Instead, it only modifies the intrinsic cellular pathways that are already there. Basically, a drug is only going to do something if it finds a specific matching target to latch onto. And that brings us to a huge concept, pharmacodynamics. Put simply, this is the study of how drugs actually create physiological and biochemical changes in us. The whole idea relies on the fact that your cellular response is a direct or sometimes indirect result of that chemical reaching its designated site of action. And the magnitude of your body's reaction, it's directly tied to how much of the drug actually makes it to that target. It's a very precise cause and effect relationship built entirely on exposure and concentration. And this curve right here perfectly illustrates that dose-response relationship. Look at how it lays out two absolutely crucial pharmacological concepts. First up, we've got intrinsic efficacy, which you can see as the vertical height of the curve. This is the absolute maximum physiological effect a drug can pull off, regardless of how much you pump into the system. There's a ceiling. Then, on the horizontal axis, we have potency. Potency just tells us how much of the drug, the actual dose, is required to climb that slope and trigger a specific effect. So, a highly potent drug, you just need a tiny little drop to get a massive reaction. Section 2. The autonomic nervous system, mapping the body. Okay, so now that we know these drugs absolutely need a target, let's map out one of the biggest, most intricate target networks inside you. Our nervous system branches out a lot like a tree. Right at the base, it splits into the central and peripheral systems. If we follow that peripheral branch, it divides our actions into two camps. The voluntary somatic movements, like you actively deciding to raise your hand, and the involuntary autonomic controls. And that autonomic branch? It splits one last time into the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. It's really cool to see this geographic split visually. Your brain and spinal cord act as the central command, the CNS. Everything else, all those cranial nerves and spinal nerves branching out into your limbs and organs, that's your peripheral network. You can even see the ganglia, which are basically clusters of nerve cell bodies sitting just outside the CNS, acting like little relay stations for the signals. And when we zero in on the autonomic nervous system, its involuntary reach is just mind-blowing. It goes everywhere to maintain homeostasis. Entirely behind the scenes, without you ever having to spare a single thought, this system is running your cardiovascular system, tweaking your respiratory rate, managing your GI tract motility, and even adjusting the diameter of your pupils depending on the lighting in the room. It is literally the ultimate behind-the-scenes operator. Section 3. Fight, flight, or rest. Dual control. So, how does this autonomic system actually keep us perfectly balanced? Well, it does it by using opposing signals. Structurally speaking, these two rival systems are built totally differently to do their jobs. The sympathetic division, that's your fight-or-flight mode, sprouts from the middle of your back, the thoracolumbar region. It uses short starter nerves, called preganglionic nerves, to quickly hit those relay ganglia, and then it uses very long nerves to reach out to the organs. But in stark contrast, the parasympathetic division, your rest and digest mode, anchors at the very top and bottom, the cranial and sacral regions. It uses super long starter nerves and then really short postganglionic nerves right next to the target organs. But here's the catch. They aren't just flipping simple on and off switches. The autonomic nervous system is all about modifying intrinsic activity. Think of this dual control, kind of like driving a car. The sympathetic system is your gas pedal, always ready to rev up your heart rate, while the parasympathetic system acts as your brakes. They're constantly working together, doing this push and pull to regulate the normal tone of your organs. In fact, for most organs, the parasympathetic system acts as the default resting tone. Section 4. The language of cells, crossing the gap. All right, we know the organs and we know the wiring. Let's zoom in way further.
how does the actual communication happen at the very ends of those nerves? This is super important. Nerves do not physically touch the organs they control. There's a microscopic space there called a synapse. So to cross that gap, the nerves literally toss chemical signaling molecules across. For the parasympathetic and somatic systems, they mostly use acetylcholine. But for the sympathetic system, we get norepinephrine plus epinephrine. These chemicals act like little messengers floating across the void to deliver the command to the organ.
Which brings us to a really fascinating threshold. Your brain fires a signal down the nerve nerve spits out a tiny drop of norepinephrine into that gap, and the chemical lands on a heart cell. But how exactly does that tiny chemical drop sitting on the outside of a cell translate into the massive physical action of a beating heart on the inside? Section 5. Receptors and G proteins, the micro-world gateways. To get our answer, we need to zoom in about 1,000,000 times, right down to the surface of a single cell membrane. We are officially in the realm of cellular receptors. One way that chemical message sneaks inside is through ligand-gated ion channels. Basically, the signaling molecule, the ligand, binds to a closed channel on the cell's exterior. That physical binding physically twists the shape of the receptor, popping open a tiny tunnel. Instantly, specific ions rush into the cell, which shifts the electrical balance and kicks off an intracellular signal. It is lightning fast, direct, and incredibly effective. But there's another, way more complex way these cells talk to each other, and that's through a G-protein-coupled receptor cascade, or GPCR. Now, I know that sounds a bit intimidating, but we can easily break it down into a 3-step dance. Step 1, the signal molecule locks on to the GPCR on the outside. Step 2, this triggers a reaction inside the cell where an inactive molecule called GDP is swapped out for a fully active one called GTP. And finally, step 3, that little swap energizes the G protein, making its alpha subunit physically break off, float away, and trigger a specific effector enzyme somewhere else inside the cell. Just picture this elegant 1-2-3 dance playing out. Imagine that GPCR snaking its way through the plasma membrane. The second the signal molecule lands on top of it, the whole structure shifts. Down below the surface, the guanine nucleotides make that GDP for GTP swap. This immediately awakens the alpha subunit. It breaks away from its beta and gamma buddies and rushes off to activate an effector. It is literally a microscopic molecular machine, turning a tiny touch on the outside into massive action on the inside. Section 6. The adrenergic targets, specificity in action. Let's wrap up by looking at just how specific these microscopic interactions get when adrenaline and norepinephrine actually bind to these receptors. This chart, it's basically the ultimate pharmacology cheat sheet. It breaks down exactly how different adrenergic receptors act as highly specialized locks. Because we have all these different types of receptors, a single drug can have completely different effects depending on which lock it targets. For example, alpha-1 receptors are tied closely to your smooth muscle and eyes. But beta-1 receptors, those are mostly hanging out in the heart, acting as that gas pedal we talked about earlier. Meanwhile, beta-2 receptors are targeting the bronchial tissue in your lungs. This incredible specificity is exactly why a doctor can give you a beta-2 agonist to open up your airways during an asthma attack without accidentally sending your heart rate through the roof. We've traveled all the way from the big, visible branches of your nervous system down to the invisible shifting of a single guanine nucleotide. It really makes you stop and wonder, doesn't it? If changing just one molecule on a microscopic cellular gateway can alter your pulse or dilate your lungs, what other intricate, totally unseen systems are quietly keeping you perfectly balanced right at this very second? Pharmacology isn't just about pills and side effects. It's the study of the incredible, invisible architecture of life itself. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer, and keep wondering about that amazing world inside you.